We are going to begin the question and answer portion of tonight's drop-in session to respond to the questions that you've been submitting through the Q&A function. You can continue to submit your questions and we'll do our best to get to them all. We will collect all the questions and post them with our answers to the website in the coming days. Thank you, and we will move to the next slide and hold there and get started on the Q&A portion.
Hello, we have a few questions from the audience. The first one is from Russell. Russell wants to know which option would have the least impact on parking.
Yep, that's a great question. So I'd say the option that goes from 12th Avenue South up to 13th Avenue South, and basically would be a greenway, will have the smallest impact to parking. 12th Avenue South is relatively wide. We would have to remove one lane of parking through there. And then once the facility goes onto a residential street, it's possible we'd have to remove a handful of spots, like at intersections, to increase visibility for people walking and biking, crossing streets, but generally it'd be a lower impact in terms of how the curb space is used today.
Great. Our next question is from Kevin. Kevin asks, doesn't putting a bike lane on a bus route create conflicts at each stop? Why would SDOT put a bike lane on a bus route?
That's a great question, Kevin. It's important for us to create connections to transit, using for people walking and for biking. So that's one reason that we do it. And then the second is when we're looking at streets where there's buses and we want to put a bike facility, we look at how we can decrease the conflict between bikes and buses. So that could, with a protected bike lane, the buses are not necessarily pulling across the bike lane to pick up passengers. And we've also tried a couple different treatments so that we have the bicyclists go behind the bus stop, or a couple different options to decrease those conflicts. And we found that that actually can help with the predictability of both how bikes and buses are moving on our streets.
Thanks. And we have a question from Adam. Adam wants to know, a direct connection to the Beacon Hill light rail station is important, and the current greenway doesn't connect directly. How will the different segment 1 routes connect to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In front of the light rail station, it is particularly constrained, as those people who move through that area very well know. We likely will be depending on the route selection for the northern end, could be connecting on, utilizing McClellan or Lander to connect up to the grocery store to help create access. And there's some other options, and that's some of the feedback that we're looking for from folks via the survey, to hear kind of what are those last destinations that you want to make, so that we can figure out how to make those connections work for people.
Great. The next question is from Jeremy. Jeremy wants to know, will the bikes in sections 2 and 3 be in the existing pedestrian path?
Yes, so the center median path. So we're in very early planning for that piece of the project right now. We're looking at our preferred alternative that we're looking at is, widening that path so that we can make it work for both, people walking and biking, kind of like the version of the Burke-Gilman Trail. As we progress through our planning and design, we'll be soliciting feedback from the community about how we can make that work for everyone. We've heard that, this is a space that's used by people walking, and we want to make it a space that people want to be.
And next we have a question from Kathy. What will happen to the median parking in segment 2?
Yep. So I think yes. So that median parking, we're looking at how we can do two things. One, get people walking and biking through that area comfortably, and two, looking at seeing how we can preserve as much of it as possible. We are currently working with the Department of Neighborhoods to start those conversations with businesses in those areas, to find out what their needs are, if it's employees who are parking there, if it's customers. And then the third tool we have in our toolbox is to look and see kind of, as we learn how people are using that space, what we can do to help with that. So if we find that people are parking there, to then take the bus, kind of like a park and ride, thinking about how we can change the parking regulations in that area to better facilitate people accessing the businesses.
And we have a question from Robert. What treatments are being considered for the trail portions to help with bike and pedestrian conflicts?
Yeah, so we're super early planning, and so it's possible that we could, widen out the trail. We could use some markings on the trail, recommending people slow. Then there's other options to do things like the Westlake Cycle Track, which would be to use some different pavement colors to really help guide people where we'd like them to be as they're moving along that path.
Thank you. Next we're going to hear from Beth. Beth says, I jog, walk, and drive on Beacon Ave, 15th and 12th Ave multiple times each day and rarely see cyclists. Why would you pursue this when it is neither in need, demand, or an asset to our community?
So during the 2019 bicycle master plan process, the city reached out to people across the city to find out what their priorities were for bicycling in Seattle. And we heard pretty loudly from people that they wanted to see a connection in Southeast Seattle. And the two connections that were called out were a connection on Martin Luther King and on Beacon Hill. And so this project emerged from that outreach process. And so this is our first step, reaching out to the community to hear, how people would use it, what's working, what's not working in their neighborhood. The city believes bicycling is a tool to help with impacts of climate change, as well as also part of our COVID recovery, looking at how we can continue to facilitate people moving around Seattle without using single occupancy vehicles.
We have a question from Robert. Robert wants to know, will the bike lanes have enough width to support cargo and family style bikes?
That's great feedback. At this time, I will say yes. However, we are in the planning phase. And when we get down to design, we might find ourselves with some constrained spots, and we'll be coming back when we have design to share with the community to get that feedback.
ZOD wants to know, will we eliminate the current bike lane on 15th?
We will only change the bike lane on 15th if we select 15th as the route to upgrade.
Great. And Anjali wants to know, Anjali says, I live on Beacon Ave S. How many lanes of parking are proposed to be removed, and will the median be removed?
So it varies really segment by segment. And so for the middle segment, segment 2, and the southern segment, segment 3, we're very early in planning, and we will be coming back out when we have some alternatives to share with the community. Our goal is to make a safe place for people to walk and bike. And then secondary to that, we want to continue to have access to businesses throughout the corridor. At this time, we are not planning on removing the center median path. We would like to expand upon it. If we're able to expand upon the center median path, that will also have lesser impacts to parking than if we were to install something along the roadway.
Next, Brad wants to know, which south bicycle route is safest for people from each mode of transportation, pedestrian, bike, and auto?
Can you repeat that question again, please?
Which south bicycle route is safest for people using each type of transportation, including pedestrians, bicyclists, and automobile drivers?
I guess I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. I'd say for, generally for bicyclists, using protected bike lanes, so having the bike lanes with either curb or posts, is one of the safer. We consider an all ages and abilities facility for people riding, but then also bicycle routes on residential streets are right up there with our protected bike lanes. Putting people on low stress streets with low traffic volumes and low speeds can create a very comfortable place for people riding their bikes. Greenways are also a great asset for people walking. people enjoy walking generally on streets with lower car volumes and lower speeds. And when we install greenways, we tend to do a certain amount of sidewalk repair through that process. Streets that are safest for drivers generally tend to be streets where the speeds are lower, because even if we do have slightly more, sometimes there can be more collisions on slightly slower streets, but they're not nearly as serious.
Thank you. Next, Robert wants to know, since vehicles frequently don't let the bus in from stops, will we be considering floating stops to improve transit speed?
Definitely. When we start, if we select the route that also interacts with the bus route, as we're progressing through design, we're going to look at how we can both increase transit reliability, which generally reduces the number of conflicts with vehicles as we're designing out the bike facility.
And Anjali notes that they have some older neighbors who get picked up by an ADA vehicle twice a day on Beacon Ave South. How will they be accommodated?
So as we start doing outreach, once we start touching the area along Beacon Ave South, depending on the segment we're talking about, we will engage with neighbors and find out how the street's being used and try to continue to provide existing access, and also hear what challenges they're having so that we can look at what improvements we can make for the project. SDOT has a complete streets policy where when we do a project on a street, we have to look at what the impacts are to transit and pedestrians, and look at what improvements we can make as we do the improvements for the project.
Michelle wants to know why is it that in the southern section of segment 1, why does the route jog to Beacon Ave for 1 block and then back to 17th instead of using 16th to get to 17th and Hanford?
I will need to pull up our map. That interchange is a challenging part of the route. Lisa, I'm wondering if you can show the route map, or Jonathan, whoever's try to show the map up on. Keep going a couple more. Right, that's a great suggestion. If you could go 2 more back. One of the things we want to do is we do want to connect to the light rail station. And so as we're working through that particular transition, definitely we will consider 16th and how we make that transition.
Next, we have a question from Ziadi. If you choose the Northern 1 or Northern 2 options, will you add light to the cross section or to the the intersection at 15th Street and Stevens?
All right. You were breaking up, Wendy. Would you mind saying that again?
Oh, sorry. If we go with the first or second option in the northern section of segment 1, will we add light to the intersection of 15th Street and Stevens?
That's definitely feedback we're soliciting to find out what we can make it like if you're talking about like street lighting so people can see better, definitely look into that. And then if we decide to cross Beacon Avenue South at 15th, we would look at installing some sort of crossing improvement to make it more comfortable for people biking and walking.
And Anjali asks, will you introduce zone permit parking to help those of us who park on the street?
Yes, if that is feedback that we hear from the community, we have plans to engage our parking team to make that work better. So if that's something we hear, we can definitely start that conversation.
And we have a question from Ben. Does the project include repaving of Beacon Ave? No matter how protected bike lanes are, if they aren't smooth or clean, they are difficult for bikers to use safely.
Definitely. So if any piece of this project that we end up going, if it needs pavement repair, we will need to do pavement repair. We are not currently scoped to do like a full like Beacon Ave pavement repair. It would likely be some like limited sections along the route. So in our kind of initial analysis of this project, where we saw the most issues were along 12th Avenue South, 14th Avenue South, and Beacon Ave South.
Thanks. Next, we have a question from Kathy. Kathy notes that the median path goes away at the VA. Where will the bikes go then?
Yep. So with segment 2, we anticipate using the center median path south of Columbian Way. And right now, we are currently doing initial plans about how we would transition the bicycles to a facility along Jefferson Park. And we did not bring proposed cross sections this evening of how we plan to go by Jefferson Park, because we're still evaluating kind of a bunch of different options, and we will be asking for feedback about that in the near future. I recommend signing up for our email list to stay informed. A little plug there.
Good plug, yes. You can do that on our webpage. Next, we have a question from Anna. Which route is currently most used by bikes?
I'd say that's a good question, and it depends where you're trying to go. So it's pretty mixed. Anything I say is going to be pretty anecdotal.
All right, we have a question from Lisa. Why not have a bike route option going through lower traffic residential streets instead of high traffic through streets with buses?
Right, so if that's something you're interested in, I definitely recommend choosing the 12th Avenue South, the 13th Avenue South route. That route utilizes more residential streets than arterial streets.
Next, we have a quick question from Rick. On option 3, what are the conflicts with car traffic? It is very heavy on 15th Ave from Cleveland High School to Jose Rizal Bridge in the morning and afternoon commute.
Yes, so if 15th Avenue South were to be selected, and we'd only be looking at 15th Avenue South really from the Jose Rizal Bridge to Beacon Avenue South, if that were to be selected, we would need to remove all the parking along this street, and we want to be upfront that at an initial glance, that would be a pretty big impact.
We have a question from Robert. Could other improvements to the trail be considered as well, like benches and trash cans?
Definitely. As we start our outreach in the southern part of this project, the southern and middle part, we'd love to hear from people who live along that area and use that trail to find out what they would like to see, how they'd like to see that median path used, and what can make it a place that they like even more.
Blake wants to know, if the bicycle lane is installed on 15th Avenue, will there be a bicycle lane on either side for each direction? Will it be a two-way lane like on 2nd Avenue?
So we're still in very early planning for that. I think our preferred way that we like to design protected bike lanes is to have one in each direction on each side of the street. That is generally more predictable for people riding bikes as well as people driving through the area. However, 15th Avenue South is a pretty constrained area, and so we'll be, after we get our preferred route, we will be sharing back out kind of what that could look like along 15th Avenue South.
We have a question from Brian. Is there any consideration of green stormwater infrastructure improvements along Beacon south of Columbia to clean polluted arterial runoff?
So we've started some conversations with SBU. So the median trail runs right over one of the city's main water sources to the city, and so we have to be very sensitive about what type of projects we install through there. It's definitely an opportunity to start that conversation and see where there's other partnering opportunities with other city agencies.
And Gilbert asks, how much feedback and input that identified this as a high priority bike lane project was provided by residents of South Beacon Hill?
That's a good question. I do not know the explicit answer to that. I do know that we went out and met with, had held meetings in each area of the city to hear different priorities. And so that was how that emerged, as well as working with our Seattle Bicycle Advisory Board and the mayor's office.
CCAN asks, why isn't the existing street surface of Beacon Avenue an option for segments 2 and 3?
Our preferred route for the southern segments is that we've generally heard that people really enjoy kind of that trail feel to ride and bike on. However, if we do hear overwhelming feedback that people want the bike facility on the street, we will look into that. If we were to do it on the street, it would likely have impacts to parking along Beacon Avenue South.
Amy notes that they would love to be able to bike to work, but only feels comfortable on protected bike lanes. When is the planned construction for segment 1 beginning?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of our process and timeline right now. So right now we're out here talking to you, as well as talking to different folks in the community to solicit feedback on routing options on this northern segment. Once we get that feedback, we will then select what we call the most promising route, and we will share that back out with the community to just kind of reconfirm that this is what we heard and this is how we're moving forward. And then we'll enter into our design phase, and that generally takes about a year. So I think the earliest we could expect to see construction would be in 2022. There's a few, we have been applying for some grant funding, so that could impact timeline, and also the city, everything that's happening in the city right now has forced everything to be a little bit flexible, but we are looking at a 2022-2023 construction.
We have a question from Ben. If the protected bike lane option is selected, will the public have input on whether bollards, concrete blocks, or parking will be used as a buffer?
There will be limited opportunities to provide input. I would recommend, if that's something that you have interest in or care about, I'd recommend, as you fill out the survey, adding that in there. We generally like to do, if we're able, from a financial perspective, as well as an operations perspective, we like to install curb or use parking protection for bike facilities. However, there are, financial constraints, as well as, sometimes something needs to be built so that, fire trucks can drive over it or something like that. It really depends when we dive into the design, kind of what that needs to look like.
Next, we have a question from Clara. The current trail is tough with a bike because the curb cuts are at weird angles and intersections are hard to navigate. Will those street crossings be improved?
Yes, that's something that we have some very, very preliminary concepts for, and we anticipate being, as someone who bikes and walks through there, probably the biggest improvements for both people biking and walking.
Anna asks, considering that there's no safe bike option through Jefferson Park at all, why not start with that section? So we're starting with the northern section. We had heard that was a top priority, and the northern section would connect to a project that's being built late this year, early next year, across the Jose Rizal Bridge to connect people to the International District and then downtown. And the northern section also connects to schools and the business district. So that is why we are starting. We are also starting outreach with this northern section because there's more questions we need to ask. On this northern section, we're curious what street folks want to be on versus like Jefferson Park, where we know that we're going to be running along Beacon Avenue South and Jefferson Park. And so when we come back, they will all kind of sync up in terms of their timelines. Next, we have Jeremy. When is our next opportunity to provide feedback for segments 2 and 3? We have a lot of concerns about this option.
Great. So we're tentatively looking at coming back out this fall, so September, October, to talk more in depth specifically about segments 2 and 3. And if you have concerns, I recommend utilizing the email that was posted to just share those concerns. We're definitely, even though we're not formally soliciting for that part of the project right now, it's something that knowing those concerns ahead of time will help guide design as we move forward.
Tom has a question about topography. Which route requires the most climbing for cyclists? Which route has the steepest sections? So
the slide we're looking at right now, the 12th Avenue South to 13th, that has the most climbing for cyclists, and it's at the beginning along 12th Avenue South. It's the steepest grade is at 9%, whereas this, really coming from the Jose Rizal Bridge climbing up to South Massachusetts, where on 14th Avenue South and 15th Avenue South, the steepest grade's at about 7%, and that's that same section climbing up from the Jose Rizal Bridge to get up to the hill. There's no way around at least some grade for this project.
Cliff has a question about community outreach. Cliff notes, can we have a community meeting? I live on Beacon Ave South for 47 years, and I have never been asked about this project.
Yes, so this is just the start of our community outreach, and I might turn this over to Lisa to let her talk more about it, but this is our first meeting that we've had to talk about this project, so you are not alone on that, Cliff. Lisa, do you want to talk about options for community meetings?
Yeah, these are interesting times, everybody understands, so we are trying to be nimble in terms of what we can do in terms of engaging with the community. And we certainly plan to organize some community events. They might be virtual and smaller gatherings. And I'm working with the Department of Neighborhoods, and so we're coordinating all that work. This is the kickoff, like Serena has mentioned. And so this is really the start of the project and getting your feedback. So this is a great time to get engaged. And I know that I actually have been in communication with Clifford via email, so I look forward to us connecting. But you'll learn more about what the opportunities will be, and we'll be communicating those through the email listserv and through the project website. So again, would ask for you to make sure that you sign up so we can keep in touch with you.
Great. We have a question from Ziadi. If you choose the north option, 1 Greenway, will you have pullovers to allow cars to pass in narrow residential areas of the route?
Yeah, so if we select the Greenway option, we'll look at the street width of 13th Avenue South and make sure that there are places for people to pull over to let either, another car pass or, a bicycle and car pass. So there will be likely a handful of spots that where parking will be impacted.
Jeremy asks, do you plan to close any of the east to west intersections that cut through the current pedestrian path? If not, cyclists will have to stop for turning traffic at every cross street.
Yes, so we are weighing a couple different options. We are considering closing a couple of intersections, but that's something that we definitely will need to hear from the community about how they are using those cut-throughs. There are a fair amount. There's possibly for doing something more fun, creating it to be a more fun pedestrian and bike space. But, we would definitely will be reaching out to the community to find out how they feel about that.
Here's a question from Robert. Can loading zones be added to the business district where needed?
Yes, that's something that as when we select our route and start engaging businesses along Beacon Ave, we can definitely look at, what's existing space we have along the roadway and what their needs are and install loading zones.
And we have a question from Layla. Is there an option for the bike lanes to share a lane with vehicles to avoid significant impacts on parking? There are a lot of multifamily units on 14th, and it would dramatically and negatively impact those with cars.
Yes, so if we get to a selected route, something we'll look at that is not our goal is to make a route that feels very comfortable for somebody who riding a bike who isn't necessarily the most confident riding a bike. So we call it like an all ages and abilities facility. And riding with vehicles on an arterial street like 14th or 15th is generally doesn't feel very comfortable for folks. So it's something that if we have very constrained curb, like from one curb to another curb, we can look at. But if it's generally something that we would prefer not to install. But, again, as we select a route and then look at the impacts of the community, we'll be definitely looking to people to tell us, what their needs are as we move through that.
Next, we have a question from Bob. What improvements to pedestrian spaces along the road, like crosswalks, curb ramps, et cetera, will there be?
It really depends. So it depends on how we interact with different intersections and kind of the state of the curb ramps and crosswalks, what we hear from the community. If we're looking at Beacon Avenue South, we will, look at curb ramps and see, what needs to be upgraded. And then as we get feedback from the community, find out where people want to see more crossings and evaluate that.
Next, we have a question from Brad. If 15th Ave South is selected for the northern portion, what is the expected design between Beacon Ave and Jose Rizal Bridge?
So we're starting with finding a preferred street. It would likely be a bike lane or a protected bike lane on either side of the street, and we would remove parking.
Next, we're hearing from Patrick. When bike lanes have been added in other parts of the city, have you seen the number of bike riders increase?
Generally, yes, we have seen the number of bike riders increase. Generally, and that can be for a few different reasons. It can be that, people now feel safer. It could be that we now have a route that people move from other streets to go take that preferred route because they now have comfortable crossings.
And we have a question from Keenan. Are there any plans to provide charging stations for electric bikes along these routes, especially near businesses?
We're still very early in the planning for this, so we haven't gotten to that level of design detail. If you think that would be a valuable asset for people, you can definitely provide it as feedback, and we'll take it into consideration as we approach design.
C. Can asks, once this project is complete, how will SDOT know if it was successful or not?
Yeah, so after we install projects, we continue to monitor them, first foremost to make sure that they're operating how we want them to be operating. And then we do pre and post bike counts to see how the facility is being used. We're in kind of interesting times right now, and that transportation habits are a little bit in flux. So we're making note of that as if we have to collect data, what the context is and how we see that evolving in the future. And we also, last thing I wanted to add, we also continue to monitor collisions. So if we've seen a pattern of people walking or biking get in collisions, we generally expect that to go down.
Great. Next, we have a question from Sarah. Sarah notes, I'm not concerned about parking impacts, but I am concerned that the city might make choices in route planning that cyclists won't use. How much consideration is given to steepness of hills, lights and stops, turns, and other street interruptions?
So it's definitely taken into consideration. We weigh a few different factors when we're evaluating a route. Safety is the first one in terms of looking at what existing collisions occur. Another is directness, so the number of turns, topography, and then pavement condition, and then community impact community feedback is a huge piece of that. And then we kind of take that all together and kind of look at what shakes out, and see like, okay, which is preferred based on like those different elements. And then we vet it, through our city, our SDOT leadership and our traffic engineer to, to say like, hey, did we get this right? We want to install something that people are going to use, and we want to install something that works for the community that we're installing it in.
Next, Leah asks, will bike routes be clearly labeled at turns? So many routes for cyclists involve many turns, and it can be hard to follow directions if you're new to the route. Yeah, so it will, depending on what the route selection is, it will probably be a mix of, if we are making turns like on a greenway, it'll be a mix of sharrows and signage. So sharrows are those, you can see it in this picture to the right, like kind of a bicycle with the chevrons on top of it. But Randy asks, on Myrtle and Othello, with the installed bike lane poles, there is nowhere to pull over when emergency vehicles need to pass. Was this ever considered?
So when we're designing anything for the city, but my experience is predominantly with bike facilities, we do share our plans with the fire department so that they can understand the impacts and they provide feedback.
Next, we have a comment and question from Tom. I own a car and it broke down during the pandemic. I rode to the grocery store often and it was such a lifesaver. I am wondering how much traffic calming will occur in areas not selected for improvement. It's scary when cars drive too quickly.
Yeah, so for this particular project, we will be focusing our improvements on the routes that are selected. However, if you are observing vehicles moving quickly and you feel uncomfortable on a street, I recommend submitting that to our Find It, Fix It app, or you can email our project inbox and we can share it with the appropriate people.
All right, everybody. Of course, I had a hard time finding how to unmute my my WebEx. I want to thank everybody for bearing with us with some of our technical challenges tonight. We got a really nice, robust list of questions in our Q&A. We unfortunately didn't get to all of them tonight. I think we got to about 5:38. In our questions, but we do plan to download all of them and have all of our responses applied, and then the document will be uploaded to the project website. So if you didn't hear an answer to your question, or you saw somebody else's question that you were interested in hearing what the answer would be, don't worry, we will have that up on the website in the coming days. So I want to recap a few things before we close out the meeting, which is, of course, you've heard it multiple times, but it's worth repeating. The online survey is available for the Segment 1 route alternatives, and we would love your feedback and comments. Please visit the project website for the survey link. The survey link will be open through August 26th. That's 2 weeks from today, Wednesday, August 26th. And you can stay informed about upcoming outreach activities by checking the project website or signing up for the email updates through the Get Involved link on the project website. As you've heard tonight, this is just the beginning of our outreach efforts, so this is a great time to be getting engaged. After we gather all the feedback we learned tonight and from the survey, we will use that information to select the preferred route, and we will share what we've heard from you guys and the rest of the community and what that selected route is later in 2020. So again, there's going to be plenty of other opportunities to be engaged in this process. And we really thank you for attending tonight's early design drop-in session.